In a quiet African village where the rivers whispered secrets to the wind and the gardens breathed with color, a house stood apart from the laughter of the others. It was a beautiful home, painted with clay and decorated with shells that caught the sunlight, but behind its beauty lived shadows that the sun could never chase away. The villagers called it the House of Two Faces, for its walls heard both blessings and curses, kindness and cruelty. Inside lived a young girl whose mother had long departed from the world of the living, leaving behind only a memory that glowed faintly like the last ember of a dying fire. Her name was Nambi, and her eyes carried the softness of her mother's soul, a gentleness that made people lower their voices when they spoke to her. After her mother's death, Nambi's father had remarried a woman from another village, a woman who came with a smile as bright as morning dew but a heart colder than the river stones. The new wife, Leone, wore her kindness like jewelry, to be displayed before people, polished and shining. Before the villagers, she would hold Nambi's hand and call her my daughter, her voice sweet and dripping with false affection. But when the doors closed and the night grew thick, that same hand would tighten into a grip of iron, that same voice would turn into a hiss sharp enough to cut through silence. Nambi learned to live between these faces, the smiling one shown to the world and the cruel one shown only to her. She did not complain. She did not speak. Instead, she poured her pain into her daily work, scrubbing, fetching, cooking, and cleaning until her fingers burned and her back ached. She found small comfort in the river that flowed behind their home, where she sometimes washed clothes and whispered her grief into the ripples. "Mama," she would say softly, "are you watching me?" And though the river never spoke back, it always seemed to shimmer differently when her tears fell into it, as if it carried her sorrow downstream to a place beyond suffering. Leanda's cruelty was subtle, never loud enough for the world to notice. She would give Nambi smaller portions of food, harsher chores, and words that stung more deeply than any slap. When the girl faltered, she would laugh and say, "Tears are for the weak. Do you want the neighbors to see you cry?" And so Nambi learned to hold her tears until her heart ached from their weight. Her father, blinded by love and trust, never saw the truth. To him, Leone was the perfect wife, caring, devoted, graceful. He worked far away, leaving Nambi alone with her stepmother for long days and lonelier nights. The house, so full of light from the outside, grew darker with every passing season. And yet, in that darkness, something in Nambi refused to die, a quiet endurance, the last gift her mother had left her, glowing softly beneath the shadow of deceit. Leanda's resentment began like a faint spark, small, hidden, but dangerous. At first, she only watched Nambi with a strange stillness in her eyes. She noticed the way villagers smiled when the girl walked by, the way elders blessed her for her kindness, and how even the birds seemed to quiet when she sang by the river. There was a grace about Nambi that no roughness of life could wash away, a beauty that came not just from her face but from the peace she carried inside her. And that, more than anything, made Leanda's blood burn. Each time someone said, "She looks just like her mother," Leanda's smile would tighten. Each time a neighbor praised Nambi for her gentle heart, the stepmother's fingers would curl around the pestle or the broom as if she longed to strike something. She could not bear the way the girl reminded everyone of the wife who came before her, the one whose memory still lingered like perfume in the corners of the house. So Leone decided to erase her. If she could not destroy the memory, she would destroy the girl who carried it. Her cruelty deepened with every sunrise. Nambi's mornings began before the first cockcrow, with her hands deep in cold water, scrubbing clothes until her skin cracked. She swept the courtyard, fetched firewood from the forest, and ground millet long after her arms trembled with exhaustion. Every mistake, real or imagined, became a reason for mockery. "Look at you," Leone would sneer, "you think your tears will bring your mother back? Cry harder. Maybe the spirits will hear you." Her laughter would echo cruelly through the house, sharp and hollow. Sometimes Nambi would run to the back of the compound to hide her tears, kneeling beside the riverbank where her mother once bathed her as a child. She would whisper her sorrow into the water, trying to wash her pain away, but even the river began to feel heavy with her sadness. Her tears joined its flow day after day, unnoticed, unvalued, yet the river remembered. The villagers saw the signs. They saw Nambi's thin frame and the bruises that sometimes showed beneath her sleeves. They saw her carrying heavy bundles alone while Leone stood in the doorway, pretending to scold affectionately but watching with cold satisfaction. They whispered among themselves, "The poor child, the stepmother is too harsh, someone should tell her father," yet no one did. Fear of gossip, of interfering in another household's matters, kept their lips sealed. In the village, silence was a kind of survival. And so Nambi's suffering continued, unseen by justice and unheard by mercy. Each day she folded her pain deeper inside her, letting her silence become her shield. She no longer cried openly, but her eyes carried storms that no one noticed, storms that gathered quietly, waiting for the day when the sky itself would weep with her. At night, when the world slept and only the insects sang, Nambi would finally let the walls of silence fall. She would sit by the corner of her small mat, her back pressed against the cool mud wall, and let her tears slip down her cheeks without sound. Each tear carried more than sorrow. It held exhaustion, hunger, humiliation, and the aching memory of her mother's voice. The tears fell slowly, one by one, like offerings to a god who never answered. She cried quietly because crying loudly had once earned her a beating. "Stop your wailing," Leanda had shouted, hurling ashes into her hair. "Do you want the dead to think you're ready to join them?" Since then, Nambi had learned the art of silent grief. She wept when no one could see, under moonlight that painted her pain silver. Her tears landed on the clay floor and disappeared, yet something beneath the ground began to take notice. There was power in her sorrow, old, unseen power that belonged to the land itself. In that part of the village, the soil was said to be sacred, watched by spirits older than the oldest trees. They slept beneath roots and stones, only stirring when the balance between good and cruelty tilted too far. And now, as Nambi's tears seeped into the earth night after night, they began to wake. To human eyes, nothing changed. The compound remained quiet, the chores continued, and Leanda's cruelty grew like a spreading fire. But deep underfoot, where no one could see, her tears left tiny shimmers, faint threads of light winding through the roots of cassava and palm. The spirits touched those threads with curiosity, sensing a sorrow so pure it trembled like music. Sometimes as Nambi cried, the air would shift slightly around her. The candle flame would flicker though no wind passed. The river beyond the house would sigh a little louder, as if answering her pain. She noticed it once, a faint glow beneath her palms after wiping her tears. She thought she was imagining things, a trick of tired eyes, and brushed it off. But the spirit saw it clearly. Each tear was a spark of living grief, soft but powerful, lighting a path between worlds. One night, the moon hung low and full, and Nambi could not sleep. Her stepmother had accused her of stealing a piece of cloth that she hadn't even touched. The beating had been long, the insults cruel. Her back still ached, but worse was the shame that clung to her like a second skin. She went outside, her bare feet pressing into the damp soil, and looked up at the stars, the same ones her mother once told her were the eyes of their ancestors. "Mother," she whispered, her voice trembling, "if you can hear me, I'm still trying to be good. But it hurts." Her tears fell faster, dripping onto the ground where they vanished with a faint hiss, as though the soil drank them with hunger. The air grew strangely warm, and for a brief second, Nambi felt something. A pulse from below, slow and ancient, like a heart beating beneath the earth. She stepped back, frightened, but the feeling faded as quickly as it came. She did not know it then, but every tear she shed was no longer lost. They gathered below in silence, weaving together like a secret river. A river not of water but of grief, waiting, swelling, remembering every cruelty, every insult, every unkind laugh. It would remain hidden for now, but the spirits that guarded it had begun to murmur among themselves. The girl's sorrow had touched the soil of the ancestors, and the soil had begun to listen. The days grew sharper under Leanda's rule, each one carving new wounds into Nambi's quiet heart. It was no longer enough for the stepmother to overwork her. Cruelty had become her entertainment. Whenever visitors came, Leanda made sure they left with laughter. Laughter at Nambi's expense. She would call her out to sweep the yard again and again, even when it was spotless, pretending to inspect her work only to sneer at the way she moved. "Look at her," she would say with mock sweetness, "so slow, so useless. Her mother spoiled her too much before she died." The words stung more than the whippings. Every insult against her mother felt like a hand clawing at Nambi's memories, trying to tear them apart. She kept her eyes low, her voice still, for speaking only made things worse. One afternoon, Leanda took the small wooden comb that had belonged to Nambi's mother, her last keepsake, and snapped it in two before her eyes. "You don't deserve to keep relics of a woman who cursed this house with her weak blood," she hissed. Nambi's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to grab the pieces and run, but fear rooted her feet to the floor. The stepmother threw the broken comb into the cooking fire, watching it blacken and curl. That night, Nambi cried harder than ever before, her tears falling thick and fast. The earth outside her hut became slick with moisture, though the sky above was clear and dry. In the following days, strange things began to stir around her. When she washed clothes by the river, her reflection rippled though no breeze touched the water. The puddles near her washing stones stayed wet long after the sun had baked the rest of the riverbank dry. The villagers noticed and whispered, crossing themselves quietly when they saw her pass. "That girl's sorrow is heavy," one old woman muttered. "The ground refuses to forget her tears." At night, when the wind moved through the trees, it seemed to speak her name. Not mockingly, not cruelly, but with a voice that trembled like mourning. Nambi could not understand the words, yet the tone carried comfort and warning both. Sometimes, as she carried water from the well, she would feel the air grow dense around her, as if unseen eyes followed every movement. The hens clucked nervously when she passed, and the stepmother's cat refused to enter her room. Leanda began to notice the unease but blamed it on witchcraft. "You bring bad spirits into this home," she shouted, throwing a gourd at Nambi's feet. "Maybe your cursed mother left them behind to torment me." She laughed harshly, but for the first time, there was something brittle in her voice, a flicker of unease she couldn't explain. That night, rain began to fall though no clouds hung above the village. It was a strange, silent drizzle that wet only the stepmother's compound, cool drops sliding down the roof and pooling in the yard. Nambi stood at her window, her heart pounding, and realized the puddles glowed faintly in the dark. The earth had begun to answer her tears, and though she did not yet understand why, she sensed that the balance was shifting. The world had started to listen, and cruelty would not remain unanswered forever. That night, when the world slept and only the crickets kept vigil, Nambi sat beside her small window, staring at the rain that seemed to fall only over her home. It wasn't ordinary rain. Each drop glowed faintly, like tears of light descending from the heavens. She wrapped her thin shawl around her shoulders and whispered to herself, her voice trembling like a leaf, "Why must I endure this pain alone?" The air grew heavy. The rain slowed, its rhythm shifting from a random patter to something deliberate, like a heartbeat. Then, from within the sound of falling water, a voice rose. Soft at first, it wove between the droplets, calling her name, "Nambi." She froze, her breath catching. It wasn't a voice she recognized, yet it carried a deep familiarity, like her mother's lullaby heard in a dream. Another voice followed, older and rougher, speaking in the tone of command, "Child of tears, your sorrow calls to the earth. The ground drinks your pain." Nambi fell to her knees. "Who speaks?" she whispered into the darkness. The voices deepened, overlapping, one sorrowful, one wise, one sharp like fire. They were the ancestors, the spirits of her mother's line, who had long watched in silence as cruelty consumed the home. Their whispers surrounded her, filling the small hut like a storm made of memory. "Every tear you shed falls into the soil that bore you," one spirit murmured. "Do you not feel the river rising within you?" "I have no power," Nambi replied, shaking her head. "I have nothing left but my grief." A sound like distant thunder rippled through the night. "You are wrong, child. Grief is the beginning of power. But beware, the water of sorrow can cleanse or destroy. It depends on the heart that releases it." The warning shivered through her. The hut flickered with a dim blue glow as the spirit's presence intensified. Faces seemed to form in the rain's reflection, kind eyes, stern brows, the echoes of those who had come before her. She saw her mother's smile among them, tender yet filled with pain. Her mother's spirit leaned closer, her voice softer than wind. "My daughter, your heart is pure. You cry for love, not vengeance. That is why the spirits have listened. But if they mock your tears again, the earth will no longer be gentle." Nambi pressed her hands together and bowed her head. "I do not wish for destruction," she whispered. "I only want peace. I want kindness to return to this house." The spirits did not answer immediately. The rain continued to fall, now slower, heavier, each drop a weight upon the ground. Then the eldest voice spoke once more, "Peace will come, child, but not as you imagine. The world must drink deeply before it learns mercy." The voices faded, leaving behind the soft rustle of leaves and the lingering scent of wet earth. The glowing puddles outside dimmed, though one remained bright as silver just beyond her doorway. Nambi sat in silence, tears rolling down her cheeks. This time she did not hide them. She let them fall freely, watching as they mixed with the rain, forming tiny ripples that spread outward, wider and wider, as if reaching toward something unseen. The spirits had spoken truth. Her sorrow had become a river, and though she prayed for strength, not revenge, deep within the soil, something ancient had already begun to stir, something that did not forget cruelty or the tears that fed it. The morning began like any other, the air heavy with unspoken tension. The stepmother's voice cut through the yard like a whip, filled with accusation and bitterness. "You've brought a curse upon this house, you wicked child," she shouted, pointing toward the damp soil that never seemed to dry. The villagers had started whispering too, that strange things happened wherever Nambi walked, that her tears called rain when no clouds were in the sky. Nambi tried to explain, her voice trembling. "I do nothing, mother. It is just the earth, it weeps when I—" Before she could finish, the stepmother's hand struck her hard across the face. The sound echoed, sharper than thunder. "Enough. You speak lies and dark things," the woman spat, eyes burning with fear disguised as rage. "You are your mother's curse, not her child. Leave before I burn this house to rid it of you." Nambi stumbled back, clutching her cheek. Something broke inside her, not her body, but the small thread of hope that she had always held, believing one day her kindness would be seen. She turned and ran, bare feet cutting against the stones, tears already blurring her vision. The night sky loomed large above her, heavy with clouds that seemed to follow. She ran through the forest path until the trees opened to the clearing where her mother's grave lay, a mound of earth covered in lilies, the only place that had ever felt like home. Falling to her knees, she pressed her face against the soil, sobbing until her voice was nothing but broken gasps. "Mother," she whispered between cries, "I have tried to be good. I have tried to endure, but my heart is breaking." Her hands trembled as she dug into the earth, clutching the damp soil as though she could pull comfort from it. "They mock me for crying, but I cannot stop. I have nothing else left to give." Then it happened. Her tears began to fall faster, streaming down her face in waves. Each drop glowed faintly, shimmering like moonlit pearls. The ground beneath her pulsed with light, and a low hum rose from the soil, deep and sorrowful, like the earth itself had begun to weep with her. The lilies around the grave swayed though there was no wind. The air thickened, vibrating with unseen energy. The glow spread, tracing cracks along the ground that pulsed like veins of liquid silver. Nambi's sobs grew louder, years of humiliation, loneliness, and loss pouring out at once. The earth trembled. The nearby trees shuddered, and the sky shifted from gray to deep blue, the moon brightening as though drawn by her sorrow. Her tears no longer vanished into the dirt. They pooled, forming a small stream that began to wind its way down toward the village. Still she wept, whispering her mother's name. Each tear seemed alive, pulsing with light and purpose. And as they flowed, the trembling earth seemed to whisper back, low, distant, and ominous, as if the ancestors themselves had begun to awaken from their long silence. The night split open with a single drop of rain, soft, hesitant, like the world holding its breath. Then another and another, until the heavens began to weep in rhythm with Nambi's tears. The clouds swirled in dark, trembling masses, their edges pulsing with flickers of white fire. The air thickened, heavy with sorrow and warning. Down in the village, the first crack of thunder made elders look up from their huts. "Strange," one whispered, "the sky was clear an hour ago." But the rain did not fall like ordinary rain. It came in sheets, furious and alive, hissing as it struck the ground. Within minutes, the soil around the stepmother's compound began to darken, the puddles swelling unnaturally fast. Inside the house, the stepmother and her daughters laughed around the hearth, telling stories about the cursed girl who had fled into the forest. "Let the spirits take her," the woman sneered. "She brought nothing but dampness and misfortune." But even as she spoke, water began to seep through the cracks in the clay walls. It slid across the floor like a living thing coiling around her feet. She looked down, startled. What is this?" she stammered, stepping back. The laughter of her daughters faltered. Outside, the wind howled as if answering her. The fire in the hearth sputtered and died, smothered by the sudden gust. A roar rose from the hills, not thunder, not river, but something between them. Water came rushing through the village paths, carrying with it broken branches, leaves, and the echoes of sorrow. The villagers screamed and ran for higher ground, clutching children and animals. But no matter where they fled, the water followed, curling around homes, sweeping through courtyards, knocking over fences. At the heart of the chaos, Nambi stood in the clearing by her mother's grave, her eyes glowing faintly like twin moons. The tears still streamed down her face, but now they mixed with the falling rain, indistinguishable from the sky's grief. Around her, the lilies were submerged, yet none bent or drowned. They stood upright, untouched, shimmering faintly in the stormlight. The stepmother stumbled out of her collapsing house, her fine clothes clinging to her body. "Stop it!" she screamed into the wind. "Whoever you are, stop this madness." Her voice cracked under the sound of the rushing flood. But the only answer was thunder. through the sheets of rain, she thought she saw a figure, a girl standing in the distance, pale and still, her hair plastered to her face. Her outline flickered as though made of mist and moonlight. The stepmother's knees gave way. "No," she whispered, backing away. "It cannot be." The water surged higher, swirling around her ankles, then her waist. Her screams mingled with those of her daughters as the river, newly born from sorrow, swept through the house that had once echoed with mockery. Meanwhile, the villagers gathered on the high ridge, watching the flood tear through their land. None spoke. They saw the stepmother's home crumble, heard her cries carried by the wind, and saw how the flood spared the humble huts, the old, the kind, the innocent. One elder knelt in the mud, bowing his head. "It is not rain," he murmured, his voice trembling. "It is the child's tears. The earth weeps for her pain." Lightning split the sky, revealing Nambi's figure once more, not as a fragile girl but as a vessel of nature's justice. The wind swirled around her, forming a halo of mist. For a brief moment the entire village saw her standing there, weeping and radiant, sorrowful yet unstoppable. The flood raged until dawn, washing away cruelty, lies and pride. By morning the rain softened, the torrents slowed and silence returned. The village that once turned away from her pain now lay trembling and soaked, their fields glistening under pale sunlight. And somewhere beneath the receding waters, the stepmother's voice faded into the distance. Her laughter, her cruelty, her name, all swallowed by the flood born from tears she once mocked. When the storm reached its fiercest cry, Nambi was swallowed by the flood. The villagers watching from the hill gasped as her small frame vanished beneath the churning water. For a moment, it seemed as though the river had claimed her, just as it had claimed her pain. But the waters did not calm. They twisted and rose, spiraling upward like a living serpent of light. From within that whirl, something began to glow, not white but silver blue, shimmering with a sacred radiance that made the villagers shield their eyes. Out of the heart of the river she rose. Her body was no longer bound by the weakness of flesh, her skin gleamed like moonlit water, and her hair floated around her like dark waves. The dress that once clung to her torn and muddy body was now woven from liquid light, each fold a ripple, each movement a current. Where she stepped, the flood obeyed, curling gently at her feet like a loyal spirit. The villagers fell to their knees, their cries turning to whispers of awe and fear. "River Mother," an old woman murmured, trembling. "The girl has become one with the waters." The river's roar softened, but its voice carried through the land, deep, resonant, and sorrowful. It was her voice now, transformed into the eternal song of justice. Every drop of water spoke her grief, her endurance, her fury. The guilty could hear it clearly, each syllable a reminder of what they had done. Down in the valley, the stepmother and her daughters clawed at the mud, trying to escape the rising current. But the river moved around them like a cage, trapping them in a circle of relentless motion. No matter how they screamed or begged, the water would not release them. It pressed on them gently but firmly, forcing them to confront the reflection of their own cruelty. Nambi watched, her eyes calm but unyielding. She raised her hand, and the river surged higher for a heartbeat, then settled, not as vengeance but as judgment. The stepmother's cries turned from anger to despair, from despair to silence. The flood did not take her life, but it stripped her pride, her malice, her voice. When she finally crawled out of the water, she was no longer the same woman. Her face pale, her hair matted with riverweed, her spirit broken. The waters then turned, gliding softly toward the homes of the villagers. But where innocence had lived, the elderly, the kind, the silent witnesses who had pitied the girl, the flood stopped. It rose to their doors, shimmered and withdrew, leaving their dwellings untouched. Children peeked out to see the glowing figure standing at the river's edge, her gaze tender yet distant. As dawn began to break, Nambi spread her arms. The river mirrored her movement, expanding gently, carving new paths through the land. The people realized she was shaping its course, turning her pain into life-giving flow. The flood that once destroyed would now nourish the soil, bringing fertility to the fields. And when her work was done, she looked toward the village one last time. Her lips moved but no sound escaped. Instead, the wind carried her message, a whisper only the pure of heart could hear: "Tares remember. The earth listens." Then she dissolved back into the river, her form merging with the light of the morning. From that day on, the river bore her name, and whenever it swelled, the villagers would say the river spirit was rising, not in wrath but in remembrance. The night roared with water and memory. The flood, swollen with grief and stormlight, moved like a living being, its current whispering the girl's name. The villagers stood at the edges of their trembling homes, clutching each other in disbelief as the river rose higher, surrounding the stepmother's house like a serpent of judgment. Her home, once the grandest in the village, now stood in the middle of a restless pool, trembling with each surge. No path led to her door anymore, only churning water that reflected 1,000 faces of sorrow. Inside, the stepmother's arrogance collapsed. Her screams broke the night like thunder, pleading for help from anyone who would listen. "Please, I did not mean to harm her. She was my child too," she cried, but her voice was drowned by the echoes of dripping water, each drop carrying the girl's weeping sound, each wave repeating the same lament she had ignored. The walls groaned as though the house itself remembered every cruel word, every slap, every insult flung at the innocent girl. The floorboards warped and shivered beneath her feet, soaked in the flood of consequence. Outside, the villagers gathered, haunted by their silence. They had seen her cruelty and said nothing. They had heard the child's cries and turned away. Now they watched as the very river they once fetched water from turned into a mirror of judgment. "The spirits are speaking," an elder whispered, his voice quivering. "It is the girl's sorrow that calls the flood." None dared to move closer, for they felt that the water could read their hearts. Those who had ignored kindness now trembled under the weight of guilt, afraid their names might be whispered next by the current. Inside the house, the stepmother sank to her knees. She tried to scoop the water away with her hands, but the more she struggled, the faster it rose. Her reflection appeared on the surface, yet it was not her face she saw. It was the girl's, serene and tearful, watching her without hatred but with infinite sadness. "Please," the woman begged the image, "I only wanted love. I wanted what your mother had." But the reflection did not answer. Instead, the water rippled gently as if sighing, and the house moaned under the weight of unspoken truth. A sudden gust of wind tore through the air, and the girl appeared beyond the rising mist, no longer bound by flesh. She glowed with soft blue light, her hair flowing like water, her eyes calm but deep as the riverbed. The villagers gasped and fell to their knees. The stepmother saw her and trembled. "Forgive me," she whispered, choking on her tears. "Forgive me, child." The spirit girl stood in silence, her presence both terrifying and tender. Her voice echoed through the flood, not loud but everywhere. "Forgiveness belongs to those who weep from truth, not from fear," she said, her tone neither cruel nor kind. "You taught me pain and pain answered you. Yet I prayed not for your death but for your understanding. Let the river teach you what love denied." The stepmother reached forward, but the current pulled her back, wrapping her like gentle arms that grew tighter and colder. Her cries faded into the rhythm of the water, until only bubbles rose where she once stood. The villagers covered their faces and the river grew calm once more, its fury spent. By dawn, the village stood silent beneath the gray sky. The houses that had been pure of heart remained untouched, their lamps still glowing faintly. But where cruelty had lived, there was nothing but water, soft and glistening, like a mirror of tears. The people understood that sorrow had spoken through the storm, and no lie could ever wash it away. From that day onward, the river was no longer just a river, it was the girl's voice, whispering warnings to those who mistreated the innocent. Whenever it rained, the villagers would pause and listen. Some said they could still hear her weeping softly, not in anger but in mourning, for the hearts that never learned to love before the flood came for them. The first light of dawn broke through the clouds like a slow breath after endless weeping. The storm had finally gone silent, leaving behind a world washed clean and trembling. Water still covered the ground in silver pools, but the raging flood had drawn back to the river's heart, as if retreating out of respect for what had happened. The villagers emerged from their homes with cautious steps, their eyes wide and hollow from the night's terror. They searched the fields, the broken fences and the soaked paths, whispering her name, hoping to see her small figure walking among the ruins. But she was gone. Where her house once stood, there was now a wide, calm pool of water that shimmered like polished glass. The villagers gathered around it, afraid to speak too loudly. Beneath its surface, they thought they saw soft lights dancing, gentle glimmers that moved like the reflections of stars even though the sun had already risen. An elder knelt by the edge, dipping his hand in. "The river has taken her," he murmured, his voice trembling. "But not in anger. It holds her now." The others nodded in silence, their hearts heavy with both grief and reverence. They found no trace of her body, no piece of her clothing, no sign of struggle. Only the faint scent of rain lilies lingered in the air, the flowers her mother once loved and which now grew along the riverbank overnight. It was as if nature itself had claimed her as one of its own, lifting her spirit beyond mortal reach. Some said she had become the spirit of the river, the guardian of tears and truth. Others whispered that she now sat beside her mother among the ancestors. Her sorrow finally turned to peace. The stepmother's house was gone, swallowed completely by the flood. Nothing remained, not even wood or ashes, only ripples that moved gently like a heartbeat. The villagers took this as a sign: cruelty leaves no legacy. They bowed their heads, realizing too late how they had watched the girls suffering in silence. Shame pressed down on them heavier than the water ever had. From that day on, they vowed never to ignore pain again. They began to tell her story to their children, not as a tale of punishment, but as one of purity and endurance. As the sun rose higher, the river gleamed softly, glowing with the colors of morning gold. Birds returned to the trees and sang cautiously, as though greeting her spirit. A young girl fetched water from the river and noticed her reflection blur for a moment, as if another face had appeared beside hers, smiling faintly before fading away. She dropped her gourd in awe, whispering, "She's still here." The village would never forget that dawn. Every rainfall became a sacred reminder of the girl who wept not for vengeance, but for truth. The water still shimmered where her tears had fallen, carrying the memory of her kindness, a quiet light that no flood could ever drown. Years turned like slow-moving clouds, softening the memory of the flood but never erasing it. The village that once trembled beneath the wrath of sorrow was now reborn beside a calm, gleaming river. The people rebuilt their homes, replanted their gardens, and spoke her name with reverence instead of fear. Where the stepmother's house once stood now grew a vast field of rain lilies, their white petals bowing each morning toward the water as though in eternal prayer. Elders said the lilies were her gift, proof that even tears could bloom into beauty. In time, the villagers decided that such a soul could not be forgotten. They declared the day the flood ended as the Festival of Tears, a sacred time to remember the girl whose sorrow had washed away cruelty and awakened compassion. Every year, when the skies began to darken with the first rains of the season, the people gathered by the riverbank carrying empty calabashes and bowls made from polished gourds. They would lift them to the sky to catch the first drops of rain, believing each one held a fragment of her spirit. No one cried openly that day, not from grief but from reverence. They called the rain her blessing. The eldest women of the village led the ceremony, dressed in flowing white cloths that shimmered when wet. They sang songs woven with her story, of the mother who was kind, the stepmother who was cruel, and the daughter whose tears changed the fate of all. Their voices rose in harmony with the soft rhythm of the rain, creating a sound that seemed to merge with the river itself. It was said that if one listened closely, the water hummed along, carrying her melody downstream. Children were taught from an early age that tears were sacred. During the festival, they would kneel beside their mothers and dip their fingers into bowls of collected rainwater. One by one, they touched the water to their eyes while repeating the words the elders taught them. "May my tears bring strength, not sorrow. May my heart stay soft but never weak." The ritual reminded them that tears were not signs of fragility, but of life itself, the river of emotion that connected all people to the spirits of the ancestors. Stories were told around fires that evening. The old men, their voices deep like distant thunder, would recount how the girl's sorrow became a storm, how the flood spared the innocent, and how her spirit turned to light. Children listened wide-eyed, clutching their gourds of rainwater as if holding a piece of the divine. Even travelers who passed through the village stayed for the festival, drawn by the peace that seemed to fill the air. They returned to their own lands carrying tales of the river maiden, spreading her legend across neighboring valleys. As darkness fell, the villagers lit small lamps made from clay, each flame representing one of her tears. The lamps floated gently on the river, their reflections flickering across the water like stars. The entire river glowed that night, winding like a golden serpent through the sleeping land. It was said that if anyone looked closely, they could see her figure walking across the surface of the river, her face calm, her eyes filled with compassion, her hair moving like waves. Whether it was imagination or truth, no one questioned it. They simply bowed and whispered their thanks. Women led the final song of the night, a slow, haunting melody that carried deep emotion. The lyrics changed from year to year, but the heart of the song remained. She wept for us and we were washed clean. The song was passed from mother to daughter, generation after generation, ensuring that the lesson would never fade. They sang that kindness is not weakness, that patience holds power, and that cruelty, no matter how small, will one day answer to the tears it causes. In one of the festival's most sacred moments, a young girl, usually chosen for her kindness during the year, was crowned as the daughter of the river. She wore a crown of rain lilies and poured the final bowl of rainwater back into the river. As she did, the crowd chanted blessings for peace, empathy, and renewal. It was believed that the girl's spirit listened and smiled each time, content that her suffering had not been in vain. By the end of the festival, the village shimmered with light and laughter. The rain always stopped just before dawn, leaving behind a mist that danced over the fields. The villagers would then share food, yams, honey, and fresh river fish, as symbols of life continuing after sorrow. The elders would lift a final gourd of water to the sky, saying, "Let no tear fall unseen." The crowd echoed in reply, "Let no heart harden against another." And when morning finally broke, the river glowed faintly as it always did, reflecting the golden sun. It seemed to sigh softly, not with sadness but with peace. Her presence was everywhere, in the shimmer of dew, in the murmur of flowing water, in the gentle laughter of children playing by the bank. The festival was more than remembrance, it was gratitude, a promise that the tears which once drowned cruelty would forever keep kindness alive. Generations passed, and the story of the girl whose tears became a flood turned into a sacred legend woven into the soul of the land. Children grew up hearing her tale whispered by mothers at dusk, when the river glowed under the moonlight. Travelers who came to the village were told to speak gently near the water, for it was not just a river, it was her spirit, calm but ever watchful. Elders would tap their walking sticks on the ground and say, "This river has a memory. It forgets no pain, and it forgives only the pure." The village thrived beside that flowing reminder of justice. Each season, when rain clouds gathered over the hills, people paused in silent respect. The first drop of rain was greeted not with fear, but with reverence, for they believed it carried one of her tears, falling to cleanse, to remind, to protect. Farmers would say that their crops grew greener near the river because the earth still drank from her sorrow. Fishermen claimed that when someone committed cruelty, the river grew restless, its surface rippling even without wind. Her name was rarely spoken aloud anymore. Instead, she was called the Spirit of Mercy or the Mother of the River. Some said they saw her shadow in the mist at dawn, walking along the water's edge, her reflection shimmering like silver. To the children, she became a guardian, a spirit who wept for them when they were hurt and who smiled through the rain when they showed kindness. To the cruel, she remained a warning. The elders told this warning with quiet authority, "Mock no one's pain, for the river listens. Laugh not at tears, for they may rise against you." Even the most hardened hearts learned to soften when they stood before the water, its gentle current humming with power older than time. And so, the legend endured. The river flowed on, steady and eternal, carrying her story from one generation to the next. It was said that when injustice stirs in the world, the clouds above this village darken first, not in anger but in remembrance. Somewhere in that falling rain, her tears return, whispering through every drop, "Sorrow is not weakness, it is the flood that drowns the wicked and renews the world."